I hope you can hear me. Hi, Marvin. If you can hear me, could you just give me a wave? Okay, great. Excellent. Hi. Hi, Pat. Hi, Tracy. Good to see you. Hi, Barry. If you feel like putting your video on, it's always nice to see faces. So, hi, Mete. I won't be offended if not, but it's always nice to see you. Well, I realise that we're all in different parts of the world, so I'm not quite sure whether to greet you with a good morning or a good afternoon, but good day. If I was in Australia, that would be even more suitable, but it's good to see you all. I always love doing these things, not least because it brings together passionate cellists from around the world. And if I could ask you all please to put yourselves on mute, that would be great. We'll have a little bit of chance for interaction a bit later, but for now, if you could just be on mute, and if you did have a question at any point, please feel free to use the little hand icon in the menu to ask a question. So if you go down to the bottom where it says react on the toolbar, it says recognize hand gestures, and you can raise your hand at any point for that. So excellent. Well, I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces and a lot of new faces as well, so that's wonderful. I have tried to disable my waiting room here, but it seems like it's still on, so I will be admitting people by hand, I think, but that's okay. Okay, so it is 10 o'clock. Let's get started. Hello. So I am Dr. Sophie Weber, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and what today's format will be for our class. Again, if you could please put yourselves on mute, that would be great. Let me just mute all here. There we go. And while I am telling you about myself, it would be wonderful if you could drop me a note in the chat box just to let me know where you're Skyping from, or rather Zooming from. So I'd love to hear whereabouts you're coming from today. So myself, let me just give you a quick overview about who I am. I'm aware that many of you may already know, but if not, quick overview. My name is Dr. Sophie Weber, and I completed my undergrad in London at Trinity College of Music with a wonderful cellist, Richard Markson. He had studied from when he was 12, I believe, with Paul Tortelier and Pierre Fournier. So I was lucky to be a recipient of this kind of wonderful French pedagogy through him. I then continued my studies in America at Indiana University, Jacobs School of Music, and there I was studying with, in particular, Tsuyoshi Tsumi, wonderful Japanese cellist. He's actually the cellist that recorded for most of the Suzuki recordings, in case anybody's familiar with that. And also Janos Starker, the wonderful cellist who passed away, I think, almost 10 years ago now. Amongst many other wonderful cellists and musicians, I've recorded 3 albums. The first was the complete Bach suites, second was the first and third Bach suites alongside my own original accompaniment for chamber choir, which has since, by the way, been transcribed for cello ensemble, in case you're ever interested in cello, the Bach G major or the Bach C major suites for cello ensemble. I have that. And then the third album was a medley of romantic transcriptions for cello and piano. All of this is available on Spotify in case anybody fancies checking it out. So I've also taught in a number of different institutions and summer camps, including at several universities and pre-college music schools. I've given many masterclasses at universities across the US, and most recently have pioneered a cello lab for online learning, which happens in the spring and will be happening in the fall. So let's have a quick look and see where you guys are from. So, oh my goodness, fantastic. We've got somebody I see straight away from Brazil. Amazing. Hi, Danny. And we've got Princeton, New Jersey. We've got New Zealand. Fantastic. That's the first time from New Zealand. Welcome, Aisling. And we've got Milton Keynes, UK. Love it. Hi, Jonathan. My fellow patriot. And then we've got Belgium. Natalie from Belgium. Hi, Natalie. We have Albuquerque. Fantastic. I'm a huge fan of Santa Fe. Long Island, New York, San Diego, which is where I'm currently zooming from myself. Hi, Hector. Northeast Brazil, Pennsylvania, Alberta, Canada, fantastic. South Wales, oh, hi, Caroline. I'm so glad you could make it. Rainy South Wales, Brooklyn, New York, great. Vermont, fantastic. New York, San Diego, Denmark, Alaska, Brussels. Wow, what a great group. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that you will get something out of this. I'm going to be giving quite a lot of information, and my hope, and which is sort of generally my style in online learning, is that you take what's useful for you and feel free to just, ignore the rest or come back to it at a later stage. One nice thing about this online format is that it is all recorded, and so you can always come back to it at a later stage if you feel like there was something that you missed that you want to review, or perhaps just become more familiar with. So I do hope that you will take advantage of that if you feel so inclined. Today's format, as I wrote in the handout that I sent you, will be to cover three main aspects of the Chopin, this beautiful work, the Largo, that we're going to be looking at, and also playing cello. So we're going to be looking at a brief historical and biographical context of this piece. Then we're going to fairly quickly move on to the chamber music aspect of this work, meaning this love story that's very much written within the two parts, within the cello and piano parts, how these two parts, the cello and piano, how these two voices interconnect, how they relate to each other, and create a single whole together. And then last but not least, one of the most expressive tools, I think, for playing cello, and certainly in this Chopin Largo, is vibrato. And so we will be looking at today and tomorrow the motions behind vibrato. Today will be more of a kind of introduction to concepts behind it, and how we may use different exercises to familiarize ourselves with those motions. And then tomorrow we'll be looking at it a little bit more in terms of continuous vibrato, which is really, really important, and how we can develop that in our playing. Tomorrow we will also be looking at a bit more of a hands-on, from me, cello journey through the cello part. So I'll be playing each phrase in turn and explaining to you how I personally choose to make decisions about expressive tone colours, how I make those expressive tone colours, in particular relating to contact point meaning whereabouts we are between the fingerboard and the bridge, bow weight, bow speed, and vibrato, and also ornamentation and choice of slides. So that's the kind of overview. Out of curiosity, before I jump into the history and biography quickly, could you maybe just do a hands up for me if you would consider yourself to be a beginner? Okay, great. And could you do a hands up for me if you would consider yourself to be an intermediate? Great. And could you put your hands up if you would consider yourself to be an advanced? Excellent. Okay, great. Thank you. So, with that said, a little bit about the history and biographical context. So, Frédéric Chopin, Polish composer who obviously is primarily known for his amazing, beautiful piano music, lived from 1810 to 1849. He was only 39 when he died. And he was actually really suffering from illness for the majority of his life, unfortunately. He wrote, as mentioned, almost exclusively piano works. He wrote only 5 chamber works, and of those 5 chamber works, 3 are actually for cello and piano. All of them have piano in, but 3 with cello. So he obviously really did favour the cello, and this was in big part because he was very good friends with the French cellist Auguste Franchomme. His 3 works, which maybe some of you have heard of, are in terms of when he wrote them. The first was Introduction and Polonaise Brillante. That was written in 1829 when he was just 19. And actually that was written within 1 week. It's an amazing virtuosic piece, worth checking out. So that's the Polonaise Brillante, Opus 3. Second one was his Grand Duo Concertante. That was written in 1932. That was written for his French friend, Auguste Franchomme, the cellist. And actually, Franchomme wrote most of the cello parts. It was kind of a collaboration between Chopin writing the piano part and slightly tweaking the cello part, and Franchomme providing his insights on how to write for cello. And then last but not least, of course, his most celebrated cello chamber work, which is the cello sonata, which the Largo that we're looking at comes from. And that was written in his very last years, 1846 to 47. So we remember that he died in 49. And this piece was written for and dedicated to Franchomme. It was actually the last work to be published during his lifetime, and it was during a time when his health was particularly failing. And it seems that no work of his ever gave him as much trouble as this particular piece. So there's a fun quote where he said, "I write a little and cross out a lot." This was Chopin writing to his sister during the composition of his final major work, this cello sonata. He says, "Sometimes I am pleased with it, sometimes not. I throw it into a corner and then pick it up again." So this is very uncharacteristic for Chopin, because he typically just, music was such a fluent language for him. It really just fell out of his fingers as his piano playing did. So this piece is a beloved sonata, even though it obviously gave Chopin some trouble. And yet it is also one that cellists and critics tend to grapple with a bit. We're not quite sure how to identify it, and especially because Chopin wrote so few pieces of chamber music. Of the four movements that it's in, the first, the Allegro Moderato, is the one that particularly presents issues of balance between the cello and piano. And it does seem, this movement in particular, the first movement, does seem to have had rather significant personal significance for him. It's interesting that in the premiere, which was with Chopin at piano and Franchomme on cello, he decided to miss out this first movement totally. We know that there are definitely thematic references in this first movement to Schubert's song cycle called Winterreise, which means winter journeys. And the topic of Schubert's song cycle, which is quoted in this movement, is basically about a disappointed lover in despair at leaving his beloved. So this leads us to this topic that's obviously in this first movement and continues to be, I believe, and most musicians, I believe, would say, throughout the work, this topic of the disappointed lover in despair leaving his beloved. And of course, for Chopin, his lover of 9 years was George Sand, the French novelist. So the cello sonata was written right around the end of this relationship of 9 years. And because of this connection, we are led to have to ask ourselves, well, is this the reason that he missed out that first movement in the premiere? Was it because actually maybe it was a bit too personal to him? And is there also some significance as to why on his deathbed he asked Franchomme to play it to him, but he couldn't bear to hear more than just a few bars before asking him to stop playing? So there is much more on the internet, on Google, in wonderful books if you want to find out about George Sand and Chopin and their relationship and their wonderful output together and separately. But let's go straight into the sonata for now. The sonata is in the rather somber, melancholic key of G minor. So I would like to play for you, just so that you have it in your ear, just a couple of bars of the first movement and the second movement, which are both in G minor, very clearly in G minor. And the first movement that I'm going to play this is a recording of Jacqueline Dupre playing with her, at the time, husband, Daniel Barenboim. So here is just a few bars of the first movement, the Allegro Moderato in G minor. So immediately you have this feeling of something that is, again, rather melancholy, something that is deeply felt and clearly in a minor key, in G minor. So now here is a couple of bars from the second movement. The third movement is, of course, our Largo, so we're getting there. But the second movement, which is also very clearly in G minor, this is a scherzo, so a kind of, lighter, jokey kind of movement, fun movement, and yet it's still in this G minor. This is Rostropovich and Martha Argerich playing. So just a tiny taste to remind ourselves, or perhaps introduce those two movements. And I think it's important to have those in mind when we get to our Largo, because the Largo is in the key of B flat major. So it's in the relative major of G minor. And of course, as soon as we hear a major key, we can think, rays of sunshine, happiness, something that's perhaps not quite so doom and gloom. And I think it's rather lovely that it's in B flat major. We immediately have this feeling of solace. And I think it is really quite literally a sort of a love duet between these two voices, the cello and piano. So with all of that said, I would like to show you a score that I have annotated, which will show us these voices, shows us the cello and the piano part. And what I would really love for you to see before I share this screen with you is, first of all the solo lines between the cello and the piano are highlighted. So the cello is always in orange, the piano is always in green, and I would love for you to, as you listen to this, and we'll be listening to this with Maurice Gendron playing with Rostropovich actually at the piano for this one. So when we listen to this, I'd love for you to pay attention to how evenly this love duet is shared between the two parts, and how one part seems to finish the thoughts of the other and take it on. And there's something so carefully worked out through it, the way the two parts interweave and share one mind, one soul feeling. So I hope that you can get something of that. And here is my screen to share. So I'm going to share this with you. Make sure that's big. I'm learning all these fancy things on Zoom here. Okay, 4 score, there we go. Okay, hopefully you can now see my score, which I've highlighted, and I am going to play a recording of Maurice Gendron with Mistletoe Rostropovich at the piano, and we'll just follow along one time with this score. Here we go. Sorry. So a super, super beautiful recording there. In case you're wondering, I have not disappeared, but I am going to keep these scores up for a little bit longer as we talk about the chamber music aspect of this beautiful work. I'm sure you'll agree there's a wonderful, exquisite tenderness and empathy in Chopin's writing, and these two parts do really seem quite literally to share a thought and finish each other's sentences. Equally, I do think there's a sort of inner anguish and a certain remorse present. This again could well reflect some feelings about the way that Chopin and George Sand left their relationship. Something that again you may want to look into further on your own. But I do also notice that throughout this movement, that the dissonance and the sort of anguish that's suggested always does seem to subside in favour of resolution or perhaps just acceptance. And I think this key of B flat major in itself is perhaps also indicative of that. So I'm now going to share another score with you, and it's the same music, of course, but it's showing a deeper relationship between these two parts. So here it is, and before I jump in, I would just like to kind of explain to you a little bit what my general sort of markings here. So the first thing is I do think it's really helpful to know when we study cello a little bit about music theory, and one of the main ways to understand form in music theory is just a very simple approach of A, B, C and A prime. So this basically means this idea of A being an initial idea. So at the top here, you can see I've written in blue A. So this letter A is to represent the form. So I'm saying I'm going to call this first two-bar phrase in the cello our A motive or our A phrase, our A section. And then when you have an A here, it's in the piano part, it's because it's repeated. It's the A section again. If it's an A prime, and prime means that little tiny little apostrophe that you see next to the A here in the fifth bar, in the orange for the cello part here, piano. So that means it's still A, but there's something that's a little bit different about it. So it's like A varied. So we have A prime. Later on, we're going to have B here. So here is what I'm choosing to call B. Now, there are different ways of analysing most pieces of music, of course, and this would be no different to that. But I think that the way that I have done it is good. It's not the only way, but it's true. It holds true to itself. So B is the second idea, and here's B again. In fact, this should say B prime, so I have to hit my hand for that. It should be a B apostrophe here, because it's not quite the same, but it's similar to this. We'll come back to look at these in a bit more detail in a moment. And then you've got a little bit further down C, something different again. And A tail, I've said. Now, A tail means basically the end of the first A. If you remember, the first A section went... and if you look at this little bit here, this last bar, we have that same tail. So that's what that's referring to. What else? A double prime means a further variant. So it's not the same as the first A variant. It's a second variant, and then letter D. So I just wanted to quickly mention something about those letters there. I do think that thinking about A, B, C, and so on, and thinking about how we can create repetition, AA, or how we can create variety, A prime, are very useful tools in working with any piece of music. The other thing that I just quickly wanted to mention was the key areas, and for the key areas I've highlighted these in a sort of dark maroon colour. So here you can see big in big letters, B flat major. We're in B flat major in our happy key. However, by the time we get to the second cello phrase, we're in C minor, which is a pretty big shift, B flat major to C minor. So that, of course, is going to affect the emotional quality. And yeah, we'll go through it all briefly like this. So let's start from the top, and I'm going to play it on the piano a little, just the solo line. So as mentioned, as written in the score here, I've described this opening theme as calm and loving. And we're in B flat major. And then the piano part repeats it up an octave. Kind of like, sort of almost rather jubilant, like, oh yes, I totally agree with you, I agree so much, I'm going to play it up an octave. And there's a really lovely little detail here as well, which is this tiny little grace note here. So it's not actually completely the same as the first version because it has this grace note. And this tiny little D grace note is in the same octave as the cello part, right? So it's like it's taking that lower cello part octave and going, hey, I'm going to hold your hand and take you up an octave or raise you something. So I think that this is why I've written it's like holding hands. It's really, again, reflective, I think, of this sense of empathy and tenderness in this music, just this tiny little grace note here. Then we move to C minor, which, as mentioned, is far away from B flat major. Here's our B flat major. And now we're in C minor. It's actually a major chord in C minor. It's the sixth chord, which is a major chord. So it sounds like, well, it doesn't really fit and a bit more anguished, but actually it also is still major. We're going to this, to C minor, but we start with and as I've written in this part, you know, that I think this makes this combination of the C minor, the starting on the E flat instead of the D, right? We're up a half step to E flat here, does create the sense of a little bit more urgency and the feeling of being more plaintive, less resolved. It's interesting to me that we start and finish this phrase on E flat. So it almost feels a little bit more poignant and like can't get away from it, can't avoid this this plaintiveness. So that the E flat repeated there. And then the piano again takes it up an octave. So we have that but and this time it feels to me more like a sort of like an echo, like a wistful echo. We've taken that A theme and just taken the very end of it and made it into an echo. And then we go on, but this time with something completely different in the piano, and this is why I've labelled this B, because it's, I think, a different feeling. To me, this leaping minor seventh here da, 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 has a hopefulness to it. It's kind of, you know, it's not minor. We've gone back to B flat major, and it's yearning. It's got a bit. There's a hope in it, and that same idea of the da, 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 is then repeated in a different key in E flat major in the cello part. And the whole idea, again with the G, but now an octave up here in treble clef G in the piano, this idea is extended. So it's a sort of example of this idea of completing the other's thought. and always moving forward, in this case moving to G minor. So that here's the completing of the thought. And that F sharp that we finish the piano line on here, this F sharp, is what leads us to the feeling of trying to move to G minor. And he actually really does try to move to G minor. If you look at the bass parts as well, we have a half step movement from D to E flat to E natural, and then, not that one, let me try again. How do I do this? There we go. To F sharp to G, but actually it never really arrives fully in G minor, and we end up going to A flat major, and this would all be more kind of actually B flat major feeling. So let's go back though, because I'm getting ahead of myself. So we finished our thought in the piano. And gone to a feeling of G minor. And in the cello part, we have a new idea. This time it's going upwards, quite happily in a sort of sequence. Unexpected half step progression from the E flat, D to the C sharp. So that angst feeling really accentuated with these half steps. It's the turn figure that's throughout this movement compressed, made more painful. And this is actually what's called a German sixth chord. Don't worry about that if that's not something that you're particularly interested in. But if you're a bit of a theory geek like me, then that might be something that's kind of interesting to you. So we've got the C sharp, and then we still with these kind of turn figures going on, we go to a C natural, and then we finish with that A tail that we talked about in the very first phrase. If you remember the very beginning, it's exactly the same as what's happening here. And this kind of leads us to almost expect something similar to what we had at the very beginning. But no, of course, it's going to be different. This entire movement is through composed, and meaning it's constantly changing. And here we have a statement of A double prime with some variations, but it's in the key of A flat major, and it's forte. And the cello part's forte, and we have not had anything at all like this, so it's very exciting, really quite unexpected, because before as well, if you look, this is all piano in both parts, and suddenly this gorgeous kind of A flat major. Sorry, I'll work on my piano. So A flat major, just gorgeous, a kind of overflowing of, I love you. It's a full-blooded A flat major declaration of love. And that leads us to our final phrase, which is, this B, by the way, is just to separate the music for convenience. So we have like an A section and a B section. When we're practicing with pianists, we can say, hey, let's go from B, and they'll know what we're talking about. But I've labeled this D, and it is the longest phrase by far. So the phrases were always kind of had a tendency to get longer, and now we suddenly have this very long phrase, long to the point that to me it is referencing this idea of Baroque fortspinnen. This fortspinning is basically this idea of spinning out a motive, and it's something that happens in Bach cello suites all the time. It happens in a lot of Baroque music. Just the idea of taking a simple motive and making it longer and longer and adding it to it, kind of like you're spinning something, literally spinning a tapestry or something. And this is what happens here. He spins out this gorgeous melody with a rising sequence. There's still this turbulence in the turn motives, And we've got this sustained forte passage. So here is this section. Feeling of seriousness to it. Even just that opening harmony, you feel like, okay, this is something really, again, heartfelt, and there's something serious about it, and it's going to be a long one. Changing key to G touching ninth in the cello part here with this G, and it's a ninth. It creates a ninth against F, right? So if it was an F, it would be an octave, but it's one higher than that. It's a G, so it makes it into a ninth, and that in itself is gorgeous. The ninth, almost, that G almost feels rather kind of like a little bit isolated, but deeply poignant. And it results, this ninth seems to almost push us to this huge textural change that we have, where suddenly all these rippling eighth notes and that we had in the piano completely evaporate, and we're left with these massive gaping holes in the texture, right? Huge 2-beat and then 1-beat quarter note rests, and these punctuated offbeats in the piano. A huge textural change. There's something rather desperate about it here, I think. But the cello part keeps trying. It's sort of like it's the glue now. It's the part that holds on to this long and sticky line. And finally, in our last line, the two parts seem to come together at the same time in a more of a simultaneous equal part duet. We have the cello part playing and the piano part so a lovely sweet moment there where we have these thirds in the cello and piano part together, before returning to this not only rippling eighth note motive going on in the piano here, but even dissolving into triplets at the very, very end, and then a simple 5-1 cadence at the end, meaning of B flat also creates this feeling of floating, of sweetness, of something that's perhaps a bit beyond our earthly awareness. So with all that, hello again, good to see you. I'm still here, are you? Great. Hey. So that hopefully gives you a kind of overview of this gorgeous movement. If you are interested, I'd be very happy to share those two, the score, the annotated score that I have with you. Just feel free to shoot me an email and I'll send it to you if you would like that. I was almost going to send it to you beforehand, but then I thought, well, that kind of maybe spoils it a bit. So hopefully that gives you some insight on that. But before I go on to talking a little bit about vibrato in our last 20 minutes, does anybody have any questions at this point? Okay. Okay, great. Well, in that case, could I please invite you to pick up your cellos, if you have it, to hand? And I should also add, this is a slightly bizarre format for me because normally when I'm teaching online, it's much more interactive than this. But I felt like it was hard to get through enough of the chamber music aspect with the scores without it being a bit more about just my presentation. So that's why that was like this. But I was going to say that I feel like I learned so much from online learning and from interactive learning with people who are beginners, who are intermediates, who are advanced players. I hope that for the other advanced players here as well, that I'm sure that you will have your stories and experiences of this, where people ask such great questions, people come from such different perspectives and have different ways of experiencing things, that we just all have so much to learn from each other. And I love teaching for this reason, amongst others. So, and online allows it to be just a little bit further afield rather than just right in front of me, which is, of course, it's a really, really special thing for it to be in person as well. But so, vibrato. Out of curiosity, who here has not really started working on vibrato yet? Is there anybody who's done like a little bit of vibrato? Great. Who's done a lot of vibrato? Okay, great. So, as I wrote in the handout to you, and as I mentioned earlier, there is something that's truly, truly unique, I think, about every player's vibrato. And in many ways, when it's used with a good bow technique, it really can be one of the most defining characteristics, traits, I believe, of a string player's playing. At its heart, vibrato is this combination of shifting and rolling motion. So let's kind of have a look at that a bit. So the idea of shifting is basically this idea of opening up at the elbow. And opening up at the elbow is something that we want to feel extremely natural doing, very, very free doing. And so when we do the exercises that we're about to do, I highly recommend particularly paying attention to the ease of mobility at the elbow joint. That's where your awareness can be. And as you can see, I'm just tracing my fingers up and down the fingerboard. This particular motion is often called the cleaning the fingerboard exercise. You only need one of these, and there you've got a nice clean fingerboard too. So you can, two for the price of one. Shifting motion up and down. So to start with, I think we could do this. We can also try the same motion using the back of our right arm. And this is very helpful because the back of the arm gives, right? We're on soft skin and it's not hard, and it just has that kind of tactile mobility, which is very, very helpful for creating more of a sense of ease and not being stuck. So it's great to do this on the back of one's right arm. And I would start using quite big sweeping motions back and forth, still paying attention to that mobility of the elbow, and then gradually getting smaller and smaller and smaller until your finger stops moving, but you still have something of the feeling of opening at the elbow. Yeah, so this is a big part of what we need, and it's a very small motion. All of these motions in the end are very, very, very tiny, but essential. And what typically happens is that something's introduced and then we do it too much, and then we have to do it a little bit less, and then we have to do it a little bit more, and it's the Goldilocks syndrome. So, but this is definitely within the vibrato motion. And then of course we can do it as we were doing it on the fingerboard. We can, to start off with, not feel like we have to stop anywhere in particular, just stop where you feel you want to stop. You could also do it deliberately, trying to stop on a specific note and give yourself that challenge. And then you can try it if you're feeling like it with the bow. And apparently I like my F today, so. And this also, something that is really important to me in the cello lab that I lead and in general with teaching, is this idea of experimentation. That, you know, a huge way that we learn, of course, is by getting it wrong, making mistakes. And the more that we can accept that and be like, hey, we're all going to make mistakes, and actually mistakes are good because then we learn from them, the better. So I highly recommend experimenting, and don't feel, you know, like, please don't feel whenever when you're working that, you know, you're getting it wrong and it's like when you're practicing, because practice is the time to get it wrong. And for, you know, hopefully you have a supportive community and you can embrace getting it wrong and learn from your mistakes. So, you know, there were things that I didn't like about what I just did here. I felt like when I was here, I felt like I stopped too suddenly, kind of stopped the vibrato, and then started, and I was like, well, hang on, that's not actually keeping it going from the bigger motion that I was doing. So that's. And that time was better because I was keeping the speed of the shifting a little bit more consistent. Linda, did you have a question?
Hi. Sophie, I have a question.
Yes.
What is your thumb doing?
That is an excellent. Yes.
What is your thumb doing?
Excellent question. So the thumb should be free at all times. The thumb typically only tends to touch, when you're doing vibrato, touch the back of the fingerboard when you play an open string. However, we always want to have it in the vicinity of the back of the neck. We shouldn't be, as Starker used to talk about, hitchhiking, right? So we want it to be kind of close to the fingerboard, but loose, very, very loose. When I play, I find that my thumb is constantly slightly releasing from the back of the fingerboard and then touching again the whole time. There's that constant kind of, there it is, but in a very free way. When you do this particular exercise, then when you're doing the bigger sweeping motions, your thumb will come up. It can't be down because otherwise it's going to get stuck. So I would play as if you're in thumb position and have the thumb up. Or you can have it down and make sure you come up in time to make it not hit the side of the cello. So you could either have it down and then come up. I don't know if you can see that. Let me try again. Come up. Come down. Come down. Or you could have the thumb up the whole time. Thumb up. But if you do that, at the very end, when you come to having the finger being static, the thumb should come back down again because you don't want to be hitchhiking. So probably the best way to do this, Linda, would be to do the former option and have it down and then bring it up before you come to the upper part of the cello. So like we're talking about around fourth position to bring it up.
When you're actually doing the smaller motions,
Yes.
seems like the thumb should not be in a stressed position at all. It should be really quite loose to allow that to happen freely. When we're in the smaller realm, yeah? Or
Yes, absolutely. If you're doing smaller motions, your thumb should be free. motions too. But yeah, if I just show you what my thumb is looking like from the side here, if you can see. So it's, I mean, I'm literally kind of doing a little bit of this. My thumb is moving in sympathy with the vibrations I'm making with the playing finger, but it's not stuck. The main thing is it's not squeezing, right? We just don't want to squeeze and have unnecessary tension. There's not a magical movement that the thumb does. It just moves in sympathy to the motion that you're making with the hand and the forearm and the finger. Yeah, it's so so that's.
Oh wait, is okay. I have a question.
Yes. Oh, actually, hang on. Let's see. Was that Jonathan talking or?
Oh.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Owen. Yes, go for it, Owen. And then we'll have Jonathan. Yes, Owen.
Oh yeah. So like when doing like the vibrato, should like is this like the correct place for my arm? Should it be like flat or like?
Yes. So when we vibrate, it's really important that we have a good structure in our left arm. And this means actually having the elbow, this is something we were talking about actually recently in Betterbach workshop that I did. The elbow actually stays quite still. What we don't want to do is have the elbow doing something like this, right? There's no need for a chicken wing. So the elbow stays quite still, and of course, if you're shifting, if you're moving to a different position, then the elbow moves a little bit. But within a single position, the elbow would be fairly still. We don't want to have the arm too low, because otherwise when we do shift, as we will need to, we're going to hit the side of the cello. And we certainly don't want the arm to be too high.
Oh yeah.
So we could look for a kind of fairly flat wrist here, and the elbow being pretty fixed in one position. So when you're in one position, the elbow stays in its space, doesn't move around. And I think that understanding that about the elbow can be quite helpful in finding the best position for vibrato. It's a very good question, Owen. This is often an issue, being too low, maybe squeezing too much with the thumb, or being too high. I'm going to come back to Jonathan, if it's all right, your question in just one moment, because I do want to make sure that we also touch on the rolling motion, because it's such an important part of vibrato. So the rolling motion is basically this idea of rolling the forearm back and forth. It's something that Starker talks a lot about. It's something that Stephen Doane talks about a lot in his book, Cello Ergonomics. And it's a very simple motion, best kind of understood if we imagine opening a door handle. So we're going to reach out our left arm, outstretch your left arm, and you're going to turn the door handle both ways. And when you do that, please notice how the whole arm is involved. It's not just the hand, it's not just the forearm, it's the upper arm as well. And what often happens when we get into cello playing position is we stiffen up here. We suddenly go, okay, well, this is going to work, but I'm just going to keep this really fixed. And of course, that's a really bad idea. So to do this and see how free the upper arm is, and then come back and trying to maintain that feeling of freedom, and sort of it does feel a little bit different, but you can still get that freedom, is a great way of doing this rocking motion, this rolling motion, and keeping freedom throughout the whole arm. So I highly recommend that. And let's have a quick look at Steve Doane's roll. This is from his book, Cello Ergonomics. It's basically the idea of just going in a closed position, meaning all half steps between the fingers. I'm going to do this 1, 2, 3, 4 in fourth position, because fourth position is quite comfortable. It's actually more comfortable than first position, right? If you just try putting your hand back here and see how much more tension you have in the upper arm, just because there's less space for your arm. compared to fourth position. Fourth position is easier, and we're basically just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. And again, the motion is very, very small, but it's essential. So if you can see, hopefully you're seeing a tiny rocking between when I play the 1 and when I play the 4. It's very, very small actually, but it's there. And we can just practice this by going 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 4, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then from there, you can take the idea that I was doing before and finish on any one note. So that time I finished on a 4, but the idea is that this rocking is so much a part of vibrato that when you then stop, your hand is going to be still quite, it's going to find it quite easy to keep that rocking motion, just now localized to a single finger. So I'm going to finish on a 4. This time I'm going to finish on a 3, and then on a 2, and on a 1. So it's a simple little idea, but so much at the heart of finding ease in left-hand playing. Starker used to warm up doing exactly this kind of thing. Like if he had 30 seconds to play before he demonstrated something for one of his students, this would be, most of the time, would be his go-to. Something like this, if you watched him, he would just be doing a little mini rolling exercise. Just, you know. And in his case, he didn't even need to do it because it was just, he has the most ridiculous fluid left hand. But there it is. So Jonathan, you had a question, and then if anybody else had any questions about that or anything else, please feel free to ask. It is 11 o'clock. If you need to go, I understand, please feel free to go. I'm going to be around for a bit longer if anybody wants to keep staying with me and asking some questions. If not, hope to see you tomorrow. And thank you again for joining me today. Jonathan, yes, you had a question.
I had a question on vibrato. I've just noticed some cellists, they prefer, I think it might be called squared, when it's kind of more like, sorry, I'm standing weird, but when it's like that, and then some kind of like, sort of almost like point toward the bridge, like at a diagonal. And I believe I've heard that Starker kind of did the more diagonal thing. You would know more about that, but what are your thoughts on those different approaches?
Yeah, great question. So there's a really wonderful YouTube interview with Starker. I think it's with Paul Katz. He's talking about vibrato, and he asks Starker for his thoughts on vibrato, and he talks about this idea of an oscillation, a single oscillation, basically existing between the top of the pitch, in other words, the pitch itself, and below the pitch. So if that's true, and I think there are some sound wave analyses that would suggest that that is true, it would make sense that the motion is not really far this way and really far forwards, but it is more kind of right angles to the fingerboard and then going back this way, which would create the angle that you're talking about, where we point a little bit more towards the bridge, and that is certainly something that he did talk about a lot. Generally, I think we have more fluidity and ease in our left hand if we can feel a little bit more of gravity on this side on the this side, the first finger side of the hand. We need to have weight through all of our fingers, but by turning the hand a little bit, it does feel more grounded.
So would you say that there's like a time and place with different pieces of music where you would kind of choose one approach or the other, or are they constantly varying back and forth kind of thing?
Yeah, I think so. I would say if you have a slow a slower piece of music or slower pitches, maybe a little bit more into the string, you're more likely to be using a vibrato that is where the knuckle kind of can break this way, can turn. So rather than having rounded knuckles, we can change the knuckle position a little bit to being actually kind of broken this way. I think when you're playing very slow expressive passages, there's much more variety in the kind of minuscule motions that we're making, and a lot of that does have to do with these small knuckle motions and having flexibility in this final joint. Yeah, but in general, we want to have in fast passages in particular, we want to have the hand pointing a little bit more shaped, pointing towards the bridge. If it's a slower passage, it will be a little bit less so, I would say.
Okay. Cool.
I'm sure that answer could have been more concise, but hopefully you were able to take out of it what was needed. So, great. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, well, it's lovely to have you all join me today. I hope that you can come tomorrow. I'm going to be sending out a recording of this tonight in case people who couldn't join today want to see it before tomorrow. And if you would like to have a copy of the score, the annotated score, I'd be very happy to send that to you. You can just drop me a note here in the chat box or send me an email, and I will probably email is better just because then I'll know your email address. Yeah. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.